Brian Flores has been a really hot name, and I think the further removed we get from his tenure in Miami, the more people kind of forget about how that ended, and the better his name becomes. You know, he went to Pittsburgh and got to learn under Mike Tomlin and see how he led, and now he's been in Minnesota with Kevin O'Connell. I think the interesting thing with Brian Flores, when I think about him and being able to play under him for a few years, is which version of Brian Flores are we getting? And in year one with Miami, take you back to that year. I mean, Miami got rid of every good player they had. And that was the jokingly called the tank for two a year. But I'll tell you, halfway through that year, we hadn't won a game yet. And there was a shift in the way that he was approaching his job. He was likable. He was relatable. He demanded a lot out of the players, but he was also able to get the best version of his players. And I really appreciated him for that. But as his tenure went on in Miami, he kind of became unrecognizable. A lot of the staff he brought over from New England, that was where, you know, he cut his teeth in the NFL, was there for 15 plus years as an assistant. But I think he's going to have a really hard time if you're interviewing him as a head coach. I think in the interviews, he'll be likable, he'll be relatable. But when people say, okay, give me somebody from Miami that coached under you as a reference so we can talk to them, I think he burned a lot of bridges there. I think he alienated himself from the entire staff. Instead of what you were just talking about, having the humility to ask questions, to collaborate, I think by the end of his time there, he became a dictator. He ruined a lot of those relationships.
All right, so that was Fitz's comments on Brian Flores. Not necessarily, you know, some good stuff, but also obviously the stuff towards the end not so ideal. Matt, what was the walking it back that was said?
Ryan Fitzpatrick responded to that video that was put out on Twitter and said, "Would love for anyone interested to listen to the whole conversation that Whit and I had. I really like Brian Flores and consider him a friend. The end in Miami wasn't pretty, but I think he has grown and can look back on his tenure in Miami knowing he wasn't perfect and has learned a lot."
I want to kind of highlight some of the people that we're bringing in for interviews, because I do think it is important to give some context around Brian Flores for all the reasons that kind of Fitz laid out there. And I want to highlight some names, obviously. Josh McCown, Ryan Grigson, and obviously Brian Flores, three guys from the Vikings. I want to have conversations with all of them. And I think, you know, while I don't like Ryan Grigson as a GM candidate, he's the one that drafted Andrew Luck, traded a first for Trent Richardson, wasn't able to put an offensive line around Andrew Luck, got fired 3 years later. Andrew Luck up and retires just before the season. You know, on face value, it's like, give him a little bit of a head scratcher in terms of an interview. But this guy is in the building with Brian Flores right now. Josh McCown in the building with Brian Flores right now. Getting them in for head coaching and GM candidate roles allows you to expand on thoughts. Hey, Grigson, what do you think about Brian Flores? What are your opinions on him as a head coach? What did you like and dislike in Minnesota? You know, you could even argue, is there any thought that maybe J.J. McCarthy could be on the table? Like, getting some of these inside tidbits and knowledge pieces about Brian Flores, the quarterback situation in that particular building, how much of an impact did McCown have on that? It helps you gather a little bit of information. So I do like the information gathering that the Jets are trying to do. And my gut feeling is the pairings that we're going to ultimately end up with, and I'd be very happy with this. Thomas Dimitroff overlapped, I believe, I'm pretty sure, with Brian Flores in New England, and then we're going to get Josh McCown as OC, and I think that's going to be our three guys that we're looking at together, and they're guys that I think would want to be here in the building. We obviously, Dimitroff was the first GM candidate we looked at before any of these other guys. You know, Flores getting a second shot to be a head coach, and Josh McCown, obviously, you know, Jets guys inside the building love Uncle Josh. So I think they'd be very grateful for the opportunity, and I think it'd be a pretty slam dunk hirings, if I do say so myself.